On Christmas morning last year, I hit the bathroom floor before my mind even understood I was falling. 1 second I was upright. The next, the cold tile rose up and cracked into my hip with a sound that told me instantly, brutally, this Christmas would not be like the others. The light above me flickered, trembling like it didn't want to witness what came next. Steam from my morning wash clung to the tiles, turning the floor into a slick, silent trap. I tried to roll. Pain speared down my hip, twisting through my knee like a slow, merciless drill. My phone was on the sink, just inches away, yet from the ground it felt miles out of reach. I clawed forward, elbow, breath, elbow, each movement slicing deeper into the places where age hides its quiet injuries. I hooked a towel around the sink and dragged the phone down into my hands. The first name I called was Eric, my son. The boy who used to panic if my voice cracked on the phone. The man who once swore, "Dad, I'm here. Always." 3 rings. Voicemail. I called again. And again. Then the screen lit up with a sentence colder than the floor beneath me. Seen at 7:12 a.m. He'd read it. He knew. His father on Christmas morning was lying on a bathroom floor, unable to stand, vision tunneling into darkness. And he did nothing. I gritted my teeth and dragged myself through the doorway. The hallway light spilled over me like a spotlight on a defeated man. My breath broke in ragged pieces, my back numb against the wooden floor. I thought of Diane, my wife. How she used to laugh while hanging the wreath on Christmas Eve, insisting it had to be straight or Santa will judge us. Now it was only me. And a house so silent I could hear the clock in the living room counting every second I lay there alone. Almost an hour passed before the front door finally creaked open. Eric stepped inside. Not running, not worried, not even curious whether I was alive. He looked around my house, not at me, with the cool calculation of a man surveying an estate he thought he already owned. He leaned down, not to help, but to interrogate Dad. How much of Mom's savings is left? I need to run some numbers. My stomach twisted. Christmas morning, my body still on the floor, and my son was asking about money. Then Melissa entered behind him, fur coat, heels, perfume thick enough to disguise the rot underneath. She smiled, a perfect glossy smile, but her eyes were sharper than winter glass. She nudged him with her voice. Go on. Ask him. Before he changes his mind. I lay there on the floor of the home I built with my own hands. The same hands that once carried Eric, taught him to ride a bike, held him during storms, and felt something in my chest go hollow. A kind of hollow that doesn't heal. They didn't notice it as they stepped around me like I was a rug needing to be replaced. But that morning, that moment, something between us snapped in a way no one could ever repair. My name is Charles Whitman, 68, Navy veteran, widower, a man who built this small house board by board with the only woman he ever loved. I used to believe my son would never abandon me. I used to believe Christmas was for family. But last Christmas proved me wrong in a way I will never forget. Before I continue, I know you're listening, maybe cooking dinner, maybe driving through cold rain, maybe lying awake staring at the ceiling because someone you trusted once froze your heart the same way. Wherever you are, tell me, what state are you watching from? What time is it right now? And if this story has you leaning closer to the screen, hit like, share, and subscribe. Because trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. And what a father can do when he realizes his son left him on the floor to die. When Eric and Melissa walked out of the bathroom, they didn't help me up. They didn't kneel. They didn't even look twice. They just said, "Take your time, Dad. We've got somewhere to be." The door closed with a thud that felt like it went straight through my ribs. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to pull myself back together in the coldest room of the warmest holiday of the year. This house, the one I repaired with my own hands, replaced tiles and painted, sanded, cared for, suddenly felt strange. Empty. Too quiet. I reached for my phone again. My fingertips brushed the screen. I called Melissa. No answer. Called again. Nothing. I called a few relatives, people who once said, "Charles, call any time." But it was Christmas. Everyone was busy. Everyone, except the pain. I crawled half in the hallway, half still in the bathroom, dragging myself toward the small side table at the end of the hall. On it sat an old landline Diane insisted on keeping. Before I reached it, my phone lit up again. Not a call, not a message, a notification, late payment alert, mortgage account, ending 55229. The name on the account, Eric Whitman. I stared at the screen, and the truth hit me colder than the floor beneath my spine. My son was drowning in debt, and he came to my house that morning. Not for me. A chill ran down my back, not from the tile but from the understanding that I was alone, completely alone. I pushed myself a few inches more toward the old landline, but my arm gave out halfway. My breath shook. My vision tunneled. The heater in the living room sputtered weakly. The wind whistled through the old window frame. Dust drifted from the ceiling with each tremble of the house. 1 minute, 2. I don't know how long I lay there. I only remember thinking I survived storms at sea. I survived nights on frozen decks. I survived losing Diane, but I had never felt as abandoned, as unwanted as I did that Christmas morning. December 25th, 2024. A day the world celebrated warmth, family, joy. And I lay on the floor of my own home, waiting to see who, if anyone, would think of me first. And it wasn't my son. I remember my hands shaking uncontrollably as I reached one last time toward the small table near the stairs. The old cream-colored landline, the one I always thought was just a decoration from Diane's days, suddenly became the last lifeline I had. My contact list didn't have many names left. People move away. People grow old. People die. And the few who were still around, I knew they wouldn't pick up on Christmas morning, except for one name I hadn't tried. Linda Harper, 66. My neighbor to the right. We weren't close. We exchanged a few summer evening greetings over our lawns. She once helped me carry a bag of soil into the garage. And back in the winter of 2021, I gave her a spare key just in case I locked myself out clearing the snow, I said. I never imagined I'd use that key at 8 o'clock on Christmas morning. But I was out of options. I dialed her number. My hand shook so badly I had to hold the phone with both hands just to keep it near my ear. Linda, it's me, Charles. I fell. My voice cracked like thin ice. There wasn't a second of hesitation. No sigh, no confused pause, no small talk. I'm coming. Stay on the line, Charles. Don't hang up. Seconds later, I heard my front door unlock with the spare key. Cold air rushed into the house as she hurried across the living room toward the hallway. I saw her boots appear in my line of sight before she dropped to her knees beside me. Oh my God. Charles, you're freezing. I'm calling 911. Her hand on my shoulder warm, firm. Steady felt like the first real human touch I'd had in what felt like forever. When the ambulance siren wailed outside, a strange lightness washed over me, not because the pain had faded, but because someone had finally come. Not Eric, not Melissa, not a single relative. A neighbor, a woman I barely knew. 2 paramedics brought in the stretcher. They lifted me gently, but the pain drove straight through me, and I couldn't hold back a groan. One of them asked, "Do you have any family nearby? We need an emergency contact." I gave them Eric's number. They called. 2 rings. Then the screen lit up with a message that cut deeper than the fall itself. Call declined. He declined the call. The paramedic said flat, factual, nothing more. But the words sliced through me like a cold blade. Linda stood beside the stretcher, worry in her eyes, not just for my injury, but for what that decline call said about the life I was living. I turned my face toward the stretcher wall. I didn't want her to see my eyes. At the Cleveland Clinic, they rushed me into X-ray. The bright white lamp overhead reminded me of Navy medical bays, cold, sterile, final. Dr. Mason Lee, a man young enough to be my son, but with a voice seasoned by long nights and too many patients, told me, "Mr. Whitman, your left hip is fractured. Not severe, no surgery needed, but you'll need 6 to 8 weeks of rehab." I nodded. I'd endured worse pain in the Navy, but this pain wasn't only in the bone. It was deeper, heavier. Linda waited outside with a small paper bag. Inside were a bottle of water, a tray of sliced apples, and an old knitted scarf. I didn't know what you liked, so I grabbed a few things, she said quietly. She sounded almost embarrassed to care that much. But it was that kind of careful kindness, the kind that isn't performative, the kind that's unsure of itself, that hit me hardest. She draped the scarf over my lap, switched on the tiny heater in the room, and talked to the nurses about my medication schedule, as if she were family. While she spoke, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of Eric, of the scene at 7:12 a.m., of the declined call, of the way he asked about money while I lay on the floor. A sudden vibration pulled me out of my thoughts. My phone. For a moment, God help me, I thought maybe it was a message from Eric. A late, "Are you okay, Dad?" An apology. A breadcrumb of concern. I grabbed the phone. Not a message, not a call. Just a voicemail automatically downloaded when the hospital Wi-Fi connected. I pressed play. And what made my chest go still wasn't the message itself, but the sound behind it. Laughter. Eric's laughter. Bright, loud, carefree. The sound of someone having the time of his life at a Christmas party. Then Melissa's voice. "Come try this." "Put the phone down, babe." I lay there in a white hospital room, harsh fluorescent light shining on my bruised hands, while my son laughed somewhere warm, surrounded by friends, food, and comfort, as I had been curled on the floor of my home. No one needed to explain anything to me. I understood perfectly. In Eric's Christmas story, I wasn't a priority. I wasn't even a supporting role. I was just a burden, a background detail, a call he didn't feel like taking. Linda returned with a cup of hot coffee. "Charles, do you need anything?" I looked at her, the only person who answered, the only person who showed up, the only person who thought about me that morning. I shook my head softly. I didn't need anything. I just needed to accept a truth I'd avoided for years. Sometimes the silence of the people you love is louder than your loudest cry for help. On the third day in the hospital, I woke to the scraping sound of snowplows outside. The muted gray light of a Cleveland winter morning filtered through the faded hospital curtains. By then, I had grown used to the soft beeping of the monitor whenever my heart rate shifted, used to the numb ache in my left hip every time I moved, and even used to the long stretches of silence between treatments. Linda stopped by early, bringing bread and apples. She straightened my blanket, checked the heater, and left because she needed to feed her dogs. "I'll be back at noon," she promised before closing the door. I looked at the clock. Almost 11. Lunch arrived, a basic tray with chicken soup, crackers, and apple juice. I had just lifted my spoon when I heard a familiar voice echo from the hallway. "I already told you I'm asking which room he's in." "Check the records again." Eric's voice, sharp, irritated, as if the nurse was inconveniencing him. A woman responded, calm, professional. "Sir, please lower your voice. This is a hospital." I set my spoon down. My chest tightened. The door swung open, hitting the wall with a hard, deliberate thud. Eric appeared first. A high-collar winter coat, expensive boots dusted with snow hair slicked back the way he liked it. His face, tense cold, looked like he'd been arguing in the car. Melissa followed. Beige coat, fur scarf, a glossy handbag that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her perfume entered the room before she did, something rich, floral, completely out of place here. But the worst part wasn't their entrance. It was the fact that neither of them looked at me right away. They looked at the room, the walls, the cabinet, the machines, as if assessing the space not out of concern but to evaluate what my life might be worth. Eric finally exhaled and offered the first words he spoke to me. "You look better than I expected, Dad." Better. My hip was fractured, my leg wouldn't lift, bruises stretched up my ribs. But to him I looked better. Melissa sat down, crossed her legs, adjusted her sleeve, and said, "Have you considered assisted living? At your age, living alone isn't safe." I asked, "Is that why you came here today?" Eric didn't bother with excuses. "Do you still have Mom's insurance payout, or any savings you haven't reported? I need to sort out some things with the house." His tone was clinical, detached, like he was questioning a bank manager not speaking to his injured father. My voice came out cold without me intending it. "Eric, did you read the message I sent you on Christmas morning?" He froze. "Probably a glitch," he muttered. I looked him dead in the eye. I saw the word "seen" at 7:12. The room thickened with silence. I could hear the monitor counting each beat of my heart. Melissa stared down at her nails, avoiding my gaze, but her voice was steady. "Charles, that's in the past. What matters now is whether you're financially secure." "Financially secure," I repeated. "For me? Or for the two of you?" Eric glanced away, a gesture that told me everything words couldn't. I could see the urgency in their eyes. Not concern, not worry, but calculation. They weren't checking on my recovery. They were assessing whether I still held anything of value. After a few hollow questions, Eric walked to the window, staring out at the falling snow. "You can't live alone forever, Dad." "Melissa and we're just trying to help." "Help," I said slowly. "Is that what you call this?" Melissa scanned the room again, her gaze lingering on the box of personal items in the corner. "You didn't bring any documents, right? It'd be bad if something important was left lying around at home." I knew exactly what she meant. They were looking for my house papers, trust files, financial folders. I shifted slightly, not because I needed to, but to shield the box without making it obvious. They noticed, and they didn't like it. Their visit lasted less than 15 minutes, but each minute sat on my chest like a block of ice. They left as if they'd completed a chore. No get well soon, no hug, no backward glance. Melissa's heels clicked down the hallway, fading quickly. Eric's annoyed voice carried as he spoke to someone on the phone. Then silence. When the door closed, Nurse Jennifer stepped inside. She hesitated as if weighing whether she should speak. Then she approached my bed and lowered her voice. "Mr. Whitman, you should know something." I frowned. "What is it?" "They stood outside your room for nearly 5 minutes before coming in." My breath stalled. "For what?" She swallowed. "They looked like they were arguing. About money." I heard a phrase, "Just ask." "He's weak now." Then they went quiet before opening the door. I stared at the ceiling. Couldn't speak. Jennifer placed a gentle hand on the bed rail. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman." The room thickened not with physical pain, but with something heavier, colder, the kind that settles deep inside the heart. I remembered nights in the Navy bandaging a wounded shipmate while waves crashed against the hull. I thought I understood hardship. I thought I had seen every kind of hurt. But the kind of hurt that comes from hearing your own child discuss money before deciding whether to walk into your hospital room. No training prepares you for that. I turned my face away and closed my eyes. Not to rest, but to keep my heart from cracking open again. But the world wouldn't give me peace. My phone buzzed. A notification flashed, new voicemail. From Eric saved. I hesitated before pressing play. Then the sound poured out. Laughter. Glasses clinking. Christmas music in the background. And Eric's voice happy, carefree. "Put the phone down." "Mel, I'm enjoying my night." I lay there drowning in sterile white hospital light, listening to my son laugh, while I had been curled on the bathroom floor that same night. No one else in the room knew, but I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not panic. Something colder. A clarity. A kind of winter that doesn't come from outside, but from the moment a father's heart finally breaks. I opened my eyes, stared at the wall, the ceiling, the light, and in that moment I understood nothing would ever be the same again. I left the Cleveland clinic on a morning heavier with fog than any winter I'd ever faced in the Navy. The sky was a solid sheet of gray, the kind that made the world feel 10 years older. Snow piled thick on the roof of the ambulance as they lifted me inside, and through the narrow window all I could see was that dull winter sky swallowing everything beneath it. Linda followed right behind the paramedics, carrying the brown coat Diane had bought me for my 60th birthday. "I'm coming with you," she said. She didn't wait for me to ask. She didn't need to. That single sentence made the trip feel less lonely. Maple Ridge Rehab Center was about 15 minutes away, a 2-story red brick building with a weathered black roof and a sign so old the metal curled slightly at the corner. Not a perfect place, not even a comforting one, but safe enough. When they wheeled me into my room, Linda set the coat on the chair, hung her knitted scarf over the bed rail, and opened the small closet. She unpacked everything with a gentleness that almost felt like memory. My reading glasses, the lotion Diane loved, and the little notebook I'd kept since my Navy days. She handled each item as if she understood exactly what it meant to me. "Get some rest," she said. "I'll be back this afternoon." I nodded. There weren't enough words left in me to thank her properly. That afternoon Eric showed up. Not with flowers, not with worry, not with the guilt or urgency any normal son might have. He stood in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets, glancing at his watch before stepping in like a man checking on a stalled project. "Dad, everything okay here?" I didn't bother entertaining the pretense. "I'm still breathing." "So yes, I suppose that's okay." For one brief second, barely a breath, he looked thrown off. Then it disappeared. "I can't stay long. Family stuff." Family. Meaning Melissa. Meaning overdue bills and mortgage notices. He left after exactly 4 minutes. I know because my heart rate monitor registered the spike for that exact amount of time. On my second day at rehab, everything became painfully clear. I wasn't a priority. I was a financial problem. Near noon, while I was doing light exercises with the physical therapist, I saw Eric's silhouette in the hallway. This time, Melissa wasn't with him. He stepped inside wearing a face meant to look concerned, but impatience leaked through every line of his expression. "Dad, I need to talk to you." I eased myself back onto the bed. "Go ahead." Eric looked toward the door, lowering his voice as if he were protecting a secret. "Could you sign something for me? Just temporarily so I can handle some things. Insurance, the house, that sort of thing." I didn't speak. He rushed on faster this time. "A power of attorney, just for a few months until you recover." I looked at him. Looked at the boy I once taught to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to stand straight when someone was speaking. And here he was asking me to sign over legal control of my life, while I lay in a rehab bed. "You need a power of attorney," I said slowly, "because you need something from my house, don't you?" Eric swallowed hard. "That's not it. It's just paperwork is complicated. With your signature, it'd be easier." The door opened. Rehab coordinator Shelley Burns stepped in. A woman with a plastic name badge, a polite smile, and a voice sharp enough to cut through excuses. "I heard something about a POA," she asked. Eric stiffened. "Yes. I'm just trying to help my father." Shelley crossed her arms. "I need to remind you that patients recovering from acute injury should not sign any legal documents. And per facility rules, any request for power of attorney requires review by an independent attorney. You're aware of that?" Correct. Eric's answer came out like metal hitting tile. "Yes." Shelley continued, voice steady but firm. "If you're attempting to manage Mr. Whitman's property or accounts, you'll need to wait until he's fully cleared and represented by his own lawyer. No exceptions." Eric nodded, jaw tight. "I'm just trying to help." Shelley met his eyes, unblinking. "Good. Then follow the rules." Eric forced a stiff smile in my direction. "We'll talk about it another time." I didn't respond, because I knew this was only the beginning. The moment Eric stepped out, I heard the sharp click of heels in the hallway, a sound I'd learned to recognize instantly. Melissa. I didn't intend to listen, but her voice carried without effort. "Did you go in?" "What took you so long?" Eric muttered, irritated. "She knows everything. It won't be easy." Melissa's tone tightened like a rope. Eric, without his signature, you can't do anything. Do you want to lose the house? Hurry before he changes his mind. I gripped the edge of my blanket. Not from fear, but from the feeling that someone had dragged a blade across the last piece of trust I had left. They weren't here to care, or comfort, or help. They were here because I was weak, because my house was valuable, because my life on paper still had something to take. Melissa's voice sharpened again. You have to move fast. We're out of time. The landlord already sent the final notice. I looked out the window at the snow falling in thick white sheets. Inside my mind, a quiet settled, a cold winter stillness that wasn't outside but deep within. The truth wasn't buried in hints anymore. It was standing right there in the hallway. My son was trying to take control of my life, and his wife was pushing him toward it. Linda was right when she said, sometimes people don't change you, just finally see them clearly when you're down. I glanced down at my hands, older now, spotted with age, but still strong enough to write my name on a page, strong enough to protect what Diane and I built. And in that moment, for the first time since my fall on Christmas morning, a cold, sharp thought ran through me. If they think I'm weak, that will be the biggest mistake they ever make. On Wednesday evening, Linda arrived at Maple Ridge carrying a paper bag filled with homemade stew and cinnamon butter toast. The rehab center was quiet at that hour, just the faint murmur of a television coming from the next room. Her presence warmed the place instantly, as if she'd carried a bit of her little Lakewood home all the way to my bedside. Eat something, Charles, she said, setting the tray down. I know food in places like this never suits men like you. I let out a faint laugh. Linda, you didn't have to trouble yourself. Trouble. She shook her head. My husband was in rehab years ago. He wouldn't have made it out if a few kind neighbors hadn't helped. She paused, her eyes slipping somewhere far away. I didn't ask, but she continued anyway. I paid off all his medical bills. Our son only asked whether his father left any insurance. The day he died, that boy's only question was, Mom, do I get anything? She gave a small, bitter smile, the kind born from wounds that never fully healed. I understand how you feel, Charles. Her words, simple, unpolished, hit the softest part of me straight on. When she left, I thanked her again and slowly reached for the drawer beside the bed. She had brought along a stack of mail from my house. She'd been collecting it daily so the snow wouldn't soak through the envelopes. I sorted through them one by one. Utility bills, car insurance ads, a letter from the Veterans Association, then wedged between them a large white envelope. Not addressed to me, not my name, not my address. It read, To Eric Whitman, Mortgage Division. The bottom corner smudged, probably from melted snow. Maybe the mailman simply shoved it into the wrong box. I opened it. Inside was a red stamped page. Past due, 90 days overdue. Mortgage notice property, 23 Willow Creek Lane. My heart dropped slow, heavy, inevitable. Eric was behind on his mortgage. 3 months. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the paper like it had cracked open a truth I'd been afraid to touch. Not surprising, but somehow still cold as ice. I sat quietly for a moment, then checked the smaller envelopes Linda had tucked into my folder, things she'd picked up from my home office. A yellow envelope, a printed email, a torn sticky note. Small fragments on their own, but together the picture became clearer than any denial Eric had offered. First document, credit card statement, balance, $28, 041.78. Account holder, Eric Whitman. Charges everywhere, furniture stores, restaurants, bars, high-end clothing. Not a single essential purchase. Second document. Medical invoice, $14,500. Patient Donna Reeves. Mother-in-law billing address. Eric and Melissa Whitman. I sighed. Medical debt is something I understand. It happens. But what I couldn't accept was this. Instead of talking to me like a son talking to his father, they viewed my assets as their last life raft. Third document, A printed email. I didn't know why it was among my papers likely left behind during Eric's last visit to my house. Subject line inquiry, price estimate, Lakewood area properties. At the bottom, my father's house is older but well maintained. Approx. 1/800 script. Please provide a range. I stared at that line until my hand trembled. Not from my hip, from realization. Eric had been planning to sell my house before Christmas. I wasn't part of his plan. I was the obstacle to it. I leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. The pain from my hip spread down my leg, but even that wasn't as sharp as the invisible knife twisting deeper behind my ribs. Eric didn't come to see whether I was alive. He came to see what papers I still had, whether I was mentally sharp, whether he could push me into signing anything. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I remembered something from Christmas morning, something I'd pushed aside, after seeing me sprawled on the floor, barely able to lift my head. Eric walked into my office, not to look for medicine, not to call for help, but with purpose, searching. I hadn't been aware enough then, but now the truth burned like a cold brand. He wasn't there to save me. He was there to search through my papers. I opened another envelope, this time one of my own. Inside was a retirement account statement with a small handwritten note. Call me if you have questions. Eric. When had he written that? I didn't remember giving him that statement. He must have taken it from my desk. Maybe while I was in the hospital. He had a key. He had access. The handwriting was his, but the intention behind it felt like a stranger's. I spread all the documents across the bed, each paper a crack wider, deeper in the bond I thought couldn't break. Then I saw one last detail. Small but sharp as a knife's edge, the date on the house price inquiry email, December 23, 2024. 2 days before my fall. 2 days before he read my message and didn't come. 2 days before Christmas. Eric had planned everything. Not a desperate mistake. Not a sudden panic over bills. A plan. I set the papers down, my breath heavy. It wasn't that I didn't matter to him. I mattered a great deal. I mattered the way an asset matters. The way a property matters. The way a sale matters. In the rehab mirror across from the bed, I saw myself, a 68-year-old man with silver hair, a bandaged hip, and tired eyes. But behind the exhaustion, something else. Clarity. Resolve. A slow-burning flame. For the first time since Christmas morning, I said to myself quietly but with certainty, no one controls my life but me, especially not a son who no longer sees me as his father. And this was only the beginning. The third night at Maple Ridge was one of the longest nights of my life. Outside the window, the sky was pitch black, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. Snow kept falling slowly, so slowly it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Inside my room, the air conditioner pushed out weak currents of cool air mixed with the sterile smell of disinfectant. I lay there alone, the thin blanket pulled up to my chest. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself on the bathroom floor that Christmas morning, my cheek pressed against the ice-cold tile, the phone just out of reach, and my son, reading my message, then choosing not to come. I shifted slightly. A sharp pain shot through my hip. The monitor beside me beeped softly as if measuring my patience second by second. Linda had gone home hours ago. Eric and Melissa hadn't visited. Not a message, not a call, just darkness. And the kind of emptiness that grows inside a man when he realizes who truly cares and who never did. Closer to midnight, I reached into the drawer of my bedside cabinet. Inside was an old brown leather folder, its corners worn, its surface scratched. I'd carried it for years but rarely opened it. Tonight my hand didn't hesitate. I pulled it onto the bed and unzipped it slowly. Inside were the papers no man ever expects to review under the cold, fluorescent lights of a rehab center. The first document, my 2016 will. The pages slightly yellowed. Diane was still alive when we signed it. We split everything equally among our 3 kids. Eric was named executor, the responsible one, the steady one. I truly believed that then. I set the will down, my fingers brushing the edge unconsciously. The second document, a power of attorney. Eric pushed me to sign back in late 2019, the year Diane died. I spent months numb, drifting through days without direction. Eric chose that moment. I don't blame the version of him I thought he was. But looking back, I see something I couldn't see then. Ambition and urgency. He wanted control. He wanted access. And I, broken grieving, signed without reading. A mistake that waited years to reveal itself. I held the page under the light. Eric's name stood boldly next to mine, a mark of authority I had handed over far too easily. I set it aside. The third document, the living trust from 2016, divided equally among the three kids. I once believed fairness was the right thing. But fairness only exists when the people receiving it are deserving. I flipped through the pages, smelling the faint mix of old paper and the antiseptic in the room. Then I remembered something. A conversation with Malcolm, my attorney in 2023. We were having coffee when he casually said, "Charles, your son called me last week. He asked about TOD deeds. Are you thinking about transferring the house?" Back then I shrugged it off. I thought Eric was being helpful, curious, proactive. He even told me, "Dad, let me look into things ahead of time, just in case you want to do something later." But TOD deeds aren't small talk. They transfer property instantly upon death. No probate, no delay, no oversight. Eric wasn't curious. He wasn't preparing for me. He was preparing for himself. A tight, burning ache crawled up my chest and wrapped around my heart. This wasn't about a fall. This wasn't about a difficult year. Eric had set his eyes on the house long before Christmas, long before my accident, long before he and Melissa walked into that rehab center with their intentions barely hidden. I gripped the edge of the bed until my knuckles strained. The air conditioner hummed louder, or maybe the room was quieter, or maybe my anger was gaining volume. I looked down at the documents spread in front of me. Evidence of a lifetime of misplaced trust. Evidence that love alone isn't enough to keep a child on the right side of decency. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. Maybe it was time. Not time to fight Eric, but time to reclaim something I'd forgotten, my right to manage my own life. I picked up my phone. My hand trembled, whether from pain, anger, or awakening, I didn't know. I dialed Malcolm. 2 rings, 3. Then his voice, sleepy but clear. "Charles, what's going on?" "It's nearly 1 in the morning." I looked at the clock. 12:47 a.m. My voice was low, raspy, but steady. "Malcolm, it's time to fix everything." There was a short silence on his end. Not surprised silence, but the silence of a man who had been waiting for this moment. "I'll be there the moment you're discharged," he said, instantly alert, all business. "And Charles, no one is to have you sign anything until I'm standing next to you." "Understood?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Understood." Malcolm exhaled, the kind of exhale that carries years of watching a client suffer quietly. "You've endured enough. When you get out, we'll start fresh. And this time, your son won't be able to touch a single thing that belongs to you." I closed my eyes. For the first time since Christmas morning, something other than pain filled my chest. Not peace, not yet, but resolve. The same resolve that once kept me alive on long, stormy Navy nights. I hung up, placed the phone on my chest, and stared at the window. The snow outside still fell softly, but it no longer felt cold. I gathered every document, slid them back into the leather folder, zipped it up carefully, and placed it beside me. That night I hardly slept. Not from fear, but because for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I had to do. And I would do it. The day I was finally discharged, the sky over Lakewood was a dull, heavy gray, the kind of February sky that refuses to make room for spring. Linda came to pick me up, carrying my thick winter coat and a small hot water bottle to keep my hands warm. "I made bean soup for you," she said as she helped me into the car. "Not much, but enough to keep you warm tonight." I tried to smile, hiding the tightness in my throat. "Linda, you've done too much for me already." She shook her head gently. "Not more than what you did for Diane. I remember everything." Her words hit harder than the winter air. Not because of the pain in my hip, but because of the ache that never truly went away when Diane left 8 years ago. When we turned onto my street, I saw my house under a thin layer of snow, the empty front yard, the old white fence with peeling paint, the roof that had weathered nearly 4 decades with me. My home. The place I thought I'd spend my final years in peace. But when Linda unlocked the front door, cold air rushed out like someone had opened a freezer. "Why is it so cold in here?" she asked. I frowned. I set the heater to 62 before I went into the hospital. Linda checked the thermostat. It was off, untouched, had been for weeks. We stepped into the living room. At first glance, nothing looked out of place. The sofa, the wooden coffee table, Diane's framed photo by the window. But then the small things began to speak. The throw blanket on the sofa shifted to one side. The filing cabinet in the corner, its door slightly ajar, barely an inch, but I never left it that way. A drawer showing a faint drag mark like someone had pulled it out and shoved it back hastily. Linda noticed before I did. "Charles, did someone come into your house?" I didn't answer. I just gripped my cane tighter, a slow realization cracking open inside me. I walked to the filing cabinet. My hand trembled as I pulled it open. Inside, several folders were out of order. One binder pushed farther out than the others, the one I always kept tucked neatly in the back. Nothing was missing, but everything had been touched, and the way it was touched. Too familiar. Eric had been here. Maybe while I was in rehab. Maybe when Linda wasn't watching. He had a key. I'd never changed the locks, a mistake I realized too late. Linda rested a hand on my shoulder. "Charles, you should check everything." I nodded. Each heartbeat felt like a drumbeat announcing a truth I didn't want to accept. My son hadn't just abandoned me the day I fell. He had used my absence, my weakness, as an opportunity to search through my home. After Linda left, I went to the garage. Nothing unusual at first, just my tool cabinet, my old car gathering dust, a few storage boxes. But as I reached down to grab a rag, I saw it, a brown envelope lying just beneath the toolbox as if someone had knocked it loose while rummaging around. On the front, written in the soft handwriting I knew better than my own. To Charles. Open when needed. Diane. My knees nearly buckled. I sat down on the small wooden stool right there in the garage, took a pocket knife, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single folded note. The paper smelled faintly of old drawers and memories, the scent of a life built over years. I unfolded it. Protect what you've built. I know you're always too kind. Diane! My throat tightened. Diane had always seen through me, my strengths, my flaws, and the kind of kindness that sometimes blinds a man to danger. I folded the note gently and slipped it into my wallet, placing her message where I kept the most important things. By the time I settled into the armchair by the living room window, evening had fallen. The small lamp beside me cast a warm circle of light, the rest of the room swallowed by shadows. I hadn't even taken off my coat when my phone vibrated. The caller ID lit up cold and sharp. Eric. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "You're home already." Not a greeting. Not a, "How are you?" "Dad?" Just impatience. I answered quietly. "Yes, just got in." He didn't wait. "Good. Then we can finally talk about the house. You were in rehab too long, we couldn't handle the paperwork. Nobody's taking care of the place and the property taxes are overdue." A chill ran through me. No concern about my health, no question about whether I could walk. "No." "Did you make it home safely?" "No." "Do you need help?" "Just the house, the paperwork, the taxes." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Eric," I said slowly, "did you come into my house while I was gone?" A few seconds of silence. Too few to hide the truth. Then he exhaled, annoyed. Dad, I just needed to check on a few things. I wanted to make sure none of your documents got lost. My documents, I repeated. Well, they're family documents, Dad. His voice grew sharper. Don't make this a big deal. Let's just talk about the house. I have a few options planned out. I looked up at the ceiling, the warm light forming a tired halo above me. You're not asking if I can walk, Eric. Silence. You're not asking if I'm in pain. More silence. You're not asking if I'm eating well. Still nothing. The kind of nothing that reveals everything. I could imagine Melissa standing beside him, giving him that push with her eyes, urging him to get what they came for. Finally, Eric spoke again, flat, direct. Dad, we can deal with all that later. Right now, we need to discuss the house. I closed my eyes. Diane was right. I had been too kind for too many years. But sitting there that night in a cold, slightly disturbed home, something inside me shifted. My kindness didn't disappear. It simply stepped aside, making room for clarity. Eric had no idea, but the moment he called only to talk about the house, that was the point of no return. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Snow was falling on the porch, soft, silent, like a curtain settling before the next act. I spoke quietly into the phone. Eric, the house can wait. I'm tired. He started to protest, but I ended the call first. Not because I was weak, but because for the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. The morning of February 18th came in muted and heavy. Lakewood wrapped under a low blanket of fog that made the neighboring roofs look like ghosts drifting in the gray. I woke with the familiar sting in my hip, but my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. I sat at the kitchen table, spreading every document I owned across the wood surface, the old will. The POA Eric pressured me into signing back in 2019, the joint trust from 2016, and the wrinkled stack of bills Linda had collected for me while I lay in the hospital. Each piece of paper felt like a fragment of a puzzle I had been too trusting, too blind, or too hopeful to see. I ran my hand along the edges of the folder, took a slow breath, and placed everything inside my old leather bag. Just as I snapped the buckle closed, Linda stepped into the kitchen. "I'm ready to drive you," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes carried something firmer, a quiet resolve. I attempted a smile. "Linda, you really don't have to." "I do," she cut in softly. "You shouldn't have to do this alone." And in her eyes, I saw something Eric hadn't shown me in a very long time. Presence. Real presence. Malcolm Rhodes's office sat in a 3-story brick building near downtown Lakewood. I first met him in 2015 when Diane and I created our joint trust. He looked exactly the same: gray suit, metal-rimmed glasses, a steady gaze sharpened by years of dealing with families like mine. He rose when I walked in, shaking my hand slowly like a man who already understood the weight of the story I was carrying. "Charles, I hope you're feeling better. I'm well enough to do what needs to be done." Malcolm nodded, motioning me to sit in the leather chair across from his desk. Linda took the seat behind me, silent but solid as a wall. I placed the folder on the desk. "Malcolm, I want to redo everything." He didn't question me right away. He simply opened the folder, skimmed the old will, the trust papers, and finally lifted the 2019 POA. He frowned. "This is the one Eric pushed you to sign after Diane passed." I nodded. "Your mental state was vulnerable at the time," he said quietly. "I had no involvement. I wasn't present." I pressed my lips together. "Correct." Malcolm pulled another small note from his file. "And, did you know Eric contacted me in 2023? Asked me to explain your POA again. He wanted to know what it allowed and what it didn't allow." I closed my eyes. My chest tightened. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Cold, sharp, merciless. Eric wasn't just greedy. He was calculating. "Did you give him anything?" I asked. Malcolm shook his head. "I have no legal right to disclose your documents. And I told him very clearly that you should remain in full control of your own estate. I nodded slowly, then said, Malcolm, I want to set up an irrevocable trust. Today. This time Malcolm put his pen down and leaned back. You understand what that means. An irrevocable trust cannot be changed, revoked, or reclaimed. Anything you place in it becomes legally separate from you. I understand, and I want that. Malcolm opened a fresh folder. What assets do you intend to move into the trust? My answer came without hesitation. My home, and the full $97,000 from my savings. His pen froze mid-stroke. He looked up from behind his glasses. And the beneficiary, I turned my head. Linda sat behind me, eyes soft, confused, surprised. I turned back to Malcolm. Linda Harper. Malcolm didn't write it down immediately. He asked one final time, his voice low metal-like. Are you certain Charles irrevocable means permanent? Once it's filed, only she can receive those assets. Not Eric, not Melissa, no one else. I didn't blink. Linda showed up. Eric did not. The sentence left my mouth quietly but carried the weight of an entire winter. Malcolm nodded once firmly. Very well. Let's begin. The process took nearly 2 hours. Malcolm wrote, explained, printed, arranged. Then he handed me page after page. I signed slowly, deliberately, each stroke of the pen closing the door behind me and opening another. Linda sat in the corner the whole time. She said nothing, but her eyes stayed on me, worried, warm, steady. When the papers were ready, Malcolm called in the notary. A young woman entered, confirmed my identity, and stood by as I signed the final page. The moment my pen touched the paper, I felt something shift, as if I had just done what Diane had urged me to do long before she wrote that note: protect yourself. The notary stamped the document. The sharp thud of the seal echoed through the room, a sound that split the past from the future. Malcolm gathered the papers, slipped them into a large file, and handed me a copy. I'll submit this to the county this afternoon, he said. The trust becomes active as soon as it's recorded. I nodded. Thank you, Malcolm. He stood and gripped my hand firmly. Charles, I'll be honest with you. What you did today is one of the bravest decisions of your life. I met his eyes. It wasn't bravery. It was necessary. Outside, snow was still falling. But the wind felt gentler. The sky not quite as hopelessly gray as it had been that morning. As Linda drove me home, I stared out the window, watching snow gather on rooftops, streetlights flicker on warm windows, glow in other people's homes. I clutched the trust folder in my lap, not because I was afraid, but because I knew after today Eric had no path left into my life, or into anything I owned. Linda glanced over from the driver's seat. You doing all right, Charles? I nodded slowly. Yes. I'm better than I've been in a long time. 3 days after the irrevocable trust became official, I kept my routine steady medication, standing practice, short walking sessions the rehab team assigned me. The house felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I had. For the first time in years, I knew with absolute certainty everything in this home was finally safe from Eric's hands. I was sitting in my armchair reading the paper when I heard tires screech in my driveway. No knock, no warning, just the sound of a key turning in my front door, a sound I knew far too well, a sound that grated on my nerves now. Eric and Melissa walked in like they owned the place. Eric entered first, shoulders tight, hair, messy dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. Melissa followed, wrapped in a cream-colored coat, her heels tapping sharply against the hardwood floor. No greeting. No, how are you, Dad? Nothing. Eric spoke first. Dad, we need to talk. It's urgent. I remained seated, not bothering to stand and welcome them like I used to. What is it? I asked, my voice steady. So steady, it surprised even me. Melissa ignored me completely. She headed straight for the dining room, pulling open drawers, checking cabinets, scanning the shelves like she was inspecting the inventory of a house she planned to list on the market. Her eyes didn't search like family. They searched like a realtor evaluating a property. Eric stood in the living room, hands clasped nervously. "Dad, I'm going to be honest." He exhaled. "We're in trouble." I looked directly at him. "Your mortgage is past due, isn't it?" Eric froze. "You know, a past due notice was in the stack of mail Linda brought from my house while I was in the hospital," I said slowly. "Along with your credit card debt and your mother-in-law's medical bills. I saw everything." Eric swallowed hard. Melissa was still rummaging through drawers like a thief looking for something specific. I asked calmly, "How much do you need?" Eric stared at the floor. "About $25,000. If not, they'll start foreclosure in March." I didn't flinch. I didn't get angry. I just felt empty. "You came here for money?" I asked. Eric hesitated too long to be innocent and finally said, "I need help. And you're the only one who can help us, Dad." Not one mention of Christmas. Not one word about me lying on the bathroom floor for over an hour. Not a single apology. I leaned back in the chair. "Are you sure you didn't forget something?" Eric frowned. I said it clearly. The Christmas message. The one I sent while I was on the floor. Unable to stand. Barely able to breathe. Eric's tongue flicked across his lips. His eyes darted away. "Dad, I didn't see it." "You did," I replied. My phone showed scene 7:12 a.m. Eric's head dropped. Not in shame, but the way a child lowers their head when they've been caught lying. I continued, "And when I was in the hospital, you entered my house, didn't you?" Eric exhaled sharply. "Dad, I just needed to check some things. Some paperwork. I thought you'd want me to handle it." "Or did you think I wouldn't be coming back?" I asked quietly. The air in the room tightened, cold, sharp, suffocating. Melissa stepped out of the kitchen to join him. "Just tell him she pushed. We don't have time for this." Then she turned to me, her voice raised. "If you don't help us, our family goes under. Eric lost his job. My mother is sick and the bank is breathing down our necks." I looked at her calmly. "And when I was lying on the floor, where was my family?" Melissa scoffed. "You're old. Old people fall. It happens." That one sentence, was the fuse on the dynamite. Eric took a step forward. "Dad, please, just something temporary. When things get better, I'll pay you back." I replied instantly. "I don't have $25,000 for someone who abandoned me on a bathroom floor on Christmas Day." Eric's mouth opened to argue, but at that moment a car pulled into the driveway. Linda. She carried a grocery bag and walked toward the front door just as Melissa left it slightly ajar. Linda was on the porch when she heard Melissa's voice ring out loud, sharp, clear enough for half the neighborhood. "If you can't get this house out of him, we're done. Do you understand? We're hanging by a thread." Linda froze. The grocery bag fell to the ground, a can rolling across the concrete. I looked toward the doorway. Linda's expression wasn't anger. It was a quiet, horrified realization of just how ruthless they were. Eric spun around and saw her, his face drained of color. "Were you eavesdropping?" Melissa barked. Linda bent down to pick up her bag, her voice calm and unshaken. "I wasn't eavesdropping. You were loud enough for the entire street." Eric drew a slow, shaky breath. "Dad, don't misunderstand. We're just—" I raised my hand. "Enough." Silence fell instantly. I looked at Eric, the son I raised, protected, taught right from wrong. The son I once believed would never cross certain lines. "Do you want to know the real reason I won't help you?" I asked. "Because to you, I'm no longer a father. I'm just a bank account." Nobody spoke. Nobody argued. Nobody denied it. Outside, snow kept falling softly onto the yard. Inside, the truth lay between us, bare, cold, and irreversible. That afternoon, the sky over Lakewood was the color of lead. A few thin flakes of snow drifted down just enough to remind me winter wasn't finished, and neither were the battles inside my home. Eric and Melissa were still standing in the middle of my living room like two defendants waiting for their final verdict. Neither of them sat. Neither of them smiled. I pushed myself up from my armchair slowly and carefully. My hips still hurt, but the pain was nothing compared to the clarity sharpening inside me. Eric spoke first. "Dad, you can't do this," he said louder than he needed to. "I'm your only son. I'm the one who deserves to manage this property. You've had my name on documents before I looked at them. Deserve it." "How?" Eric narrowed his eyes. "Don't play games, Dad. This is family property. I'm the one who takes care of you. I handle your paperwork. I cut him off. "You left me on the floor on Christmas morning." He flinched, but before he could speak, Melissa stepped forward, her voice cold as steel. "Are you really still stuck on that old people fall? It happens. What matters now is the financial situation." She reached into her oversized handbag, pulled out a pale blue folder, and dropped it onto my table. The folder cracked open, revealing a page titled Business Financial Plan in bold letters. "Here," Melissa said, sliding out the documents like she was presenting to an investor. "We've already mapped everything out. If we sell this house at current market value plus whatever savings you still have, we can open a high-end dental spa. Lakewood needs more of that. We already found a location." I looked at the papers. Not a single page mentioned me. Not a single page used the word family. Not a single page suggested they even considered asking my opinion. Eric crossed his arms, trying to regain authority. "You're getting old, Dad. It makes sense for us to manage things." I stayed silent for a few seconds, not because I had no words, but because I wanted them to climb higher in their confidence before the fall. I turned away from them, walking slowly toward the wooden cabinet by the window. Every step was heavy and painful, but each one also felt like the measured beat of a judge's gavel. I opened the cabinet, reached inside, and took out a thick beige envelope. Not old, not torn, and nothing like what they thought still belonged to them. I set it on the table right beside Melissa's dental spa folder. 2 paths, opposite directions. Eric frowned. "What's that?" "Look," I said, my voice low, crisp. He opened the envelope. He flipped the first page, then the second, then the third. And I watched it happen the moment his eyes froze, the tiny twitch in his eyelid, the way his mouth struggled to form a word. It was the face of a man watching the only bridge he had burned to ashes. Melissa rushed over, snatching a few pages from his hand. Her mouth fell open. "No, no, this can't be real. It can't." She flipped faster, growing more frantic with each page. Eric looked at me like he barely recognized me anymore. Why is Linda the sole beneficiary?" I stood straight, meeting his eyes without blinking. "Look," I said, cold enough that even I felt the shift in my own breath. "The day I was on the floor, unable to move, thinking I might not live through Christmas, you saw my message. You read it, and you didn't come." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that drains oxygen out of the air. I continued, "From that moment on, everything I own stopped belonging to you." Eric staggered back. "Dad, you're doing all this over a message." "No," I replied, "over a truth. You chose money before you chose your father." Melissa crumpled one of the pages in her fist, yelling, "You told me he'd never change the will. You said he was weak. He wouldn't change anything." Eric spun toward her, panic spreading over his face. I didn't think he would. I watched them unravel in front of me, 2 people exposing their entire scheme without me needing to ask a single question. I spoke slowly. The old will, the old trust, the old POA, none of it matters anymore. I created an irrevocable trust. It can't be changed. It can't be undone. No one can touch it. Melissa slammed the papers on the table. "You're insane. You're giving your whole estate to some old neighbor woman," I answered instantly without blinking. "Linda came to save me." My son didn't. Eric's face drained of color. I could see him trying to speak, to explain, to justify, to blame, to beg. But no words made it out. Silence flooded the room again. Not the silence of family. The silence between a betrayer and the man they thought would always be too soft to protect himself. I placed my hand on the table, my voice even. I'm not throwing you out of this house, but I need you both to understand something clearly. There is nothing here for either of you anymore. Not a dollar, not a document, not a door left open. Melissa turned to Eric, panic filling her eyes. What do we do now? Eric clenched his fists, face red from anger, fear, shame. All of it. But before he could say anything, I stepped forward and said the final line, slow, sharp, unmistakable. Look, this isn't revenge. This is the justice you chose for yourselves. No one responded. There was nothing left to say. They walked out of my home in silence. No goodbye. No door closed behind them. I watched the snow fall outside the porch, and for the first time in a long time, my home finally felt like it was mine again. The door slammed so hard I felt the frame shake. A thin cloud of dust drifted down from the hinges like snow falling inside a silent room. Eric walked out of my house the way a man runs from the sound of his own conscience. I heard his shoes crunch against the frozen snow on the porch, that dry, angry sound of someone who thinks the world has wronged him. Then his engine roared. The tires spun. His silver SUV shot down the street, kicking up snow and leaving 2 dark scars on the road behind him. He didn't look back. Not once. Not at the father who raised him. The room went still again. Melissa's perfume lingered in the air, sharp, expensive, and hollow. A scent that clung to the walls and curtains like a reminder of greed. I stood there for a long time, leaning on my cane, feeling the weight in my hip. But the pain in my body was nothing compared to the quiet spreading through my chest. A long silence, heavy but freeing. I no longer needed to wonder why Eric changed. I no longer blamed myself. I no longer held on to the fantasy that he was still the boy who used to run into my room when I coughed. I let out a long breath. I didn't lose my son today, I whispered into the empty house. I lost him years ago. Outside, the sky over Lakewood shifted from gray-purple to deep blue. Snow fell in soft sheets, slow, quiet, like memories dropping where no one bothered to pick them up. Around 7 p.m., I heard a car pull into my driveway. Not Eric, not Melissa. 3 soft knocks, familiar, gentle. I opened the door. Linda stood there holding a box of garlic bread in one hand and clutching her red wool scarf with the other as the wind pulled at it. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but her eyes were steady and warm. I made garlic bread, she said. Didn't know if you'd eaten. I figured, tonight you should have something warm. I let her in. The house warmed instantly, not because of the temperature, but because of her presence. She set the box on the table, opened it, and the steam rose, butter and garlic filling the kitchen with the smell of something simple and comforting. Linda sat down. She studied my face for a moment, checking if I was hurting, shaking, or holding something inside. Do you want to talk? She asked. I leaned back in my chair, gripping my cane. Weariness ran down my spine. I didn't lose him today, I said quietly. I lost him a long time ago. Today. I finally admitted it. Linda nodded. No judgment, no cliches, no syrupy lines like, he's still your son. She simply listened. Then she said, her voice steady. Charles, blood isn't always family. A small pause. Family is the person who stays when you need them. Her words landed softly, like someone placing a hand on your chest to keep it from collapsing. I looked out the window, snow falling thicker now. Streetlights turning each flake into gold. When he was little, I murmured, if I so much as cleared my throat, he'd run to ask if I was okay. I swallowed. But this Christmas, when I was on the floor, he saw my message and didn't come. Linda said nothing, but her silence wasn't abandonment. It was presence. She placed a piece of garlic bread on a plate. Eat. You need the strength. I lifted the bread. The butter was still warm, crisp on the edges, soft in the middle. My eyes burned not from pain, but from something older. Something tired. I don't know why you're this kind to me, I said. Linda smiled a sad, knowing smile. Because I know what it feels like to be abandoned by your own child. Those words made me look at her the way you look at someone who suddenly stops being a stranger. Everyone carries a story. Hers was one I had never asked. After dinner, I walked her to the door. The night was cold enough to sting. Snow blew sideways, clinging to her coat. She didn't bother pulling up her scarf. Before stepping off the porch, she placed her hand on my arm. You're not alone, Charles. Maybe I had been waiting all day for someone to say exactly that. I could only nod. Linda walked to her car, snow collecting on her shoulders. She turned, once gave me a small smile, then drove off. This time I didn't feel left behind. I felt supported. The house was quiet again. Very quiet, but not heavy the way it had been. I went into the garage, opened the small wooden drawer where I hid the things that mattered. I took out Diane's envelope. Sitting on the wooden step, I opened it. Her handwriting appeared under the warm yellow light, the handwriting I had memorized long before she died. I read it slowly. Protect what you built. You've always been too kind. Diane. I closed my eyes. For a moment I felt her there, leaning against the tool cabinet, smiling that soft smile she had whenever she told me not to forget my jacket on cold days. No tears. No shaking. Just an old sadness settling into its proper place. I folded the paper gently as if folding a piece of my heart, placed it back into the drawer beside her wedding ring and my old Navy badge. The drawer closed with a soft click, a small sound that felt like shutting a door on the past. Back in the living room, Melissa's perfume was gone. All that lingered was the warm smell of garlic butter. I turned on the small lamp. Its golden glow formed a circle on the wooden floor, warm, quiet, safe. I sat down in my armchair, leaned back, closed my eyes. And in that silence I understood something. Family isn't always the one you're born with. Sometimes, family is the one who lifts you off the winter floor. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Snow was still falling, but under the streetlights it looked beautiful, as if after the storm the world was gently arranging itself back into place. For the first time in a very long time, I felt real peace. May of 2025 arrived as softly as a silk scarf. The snow finally melted and thin strips of green began showing under Lakewood's pale spring sun. I stood on my front porch, hand resting on the wooden railing, my left foot touching the cool concrete step. It was the first time in months that I walked down the front steps without help. No cane, no fear that my knee would give out, no beeping monitors, no nurse's footsteps, just me and the morning wind. Inside the house, Linda was wiping down the small wooden shelf near the window. She pulled the curtains aside, letting sunlight flood in. You're walking steadier today, she said, her voice bright, like someone watching a grandchild pass a big exam. I smiled. The doctor says I'm healing slowly but surely. I think the surely part comes from all that soup you keep making. Linda laughed. Oh, don't flatter me. That soup was too salty last time. I like salty, I said. Reminds me I'm still alive. She gave me a playful look, then turned to water the plants on the windowsill. There were a few pots I didn't recognize. I brought some from home, she said. I figured your house needed a bit of color. My house had never felt this colorful. Not because of the plants, but because someone kind kept showing up, always knocking 3 soft times, always respectful, always present. June came, then July, then August. Eric never called. No text, no letter, no apology. September, empty mailbox. October, still nothing. At first the silence felt like a cold cut. Then I got used to it. And then That silence became a quiet confirmation of something I already knew. When some people decide to walk away, they walk far. And the farther they go, the more their true nature shows. But the strangest part, the space Eric left behind, no longer hurt. It no longer pulled at me every night. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like snow falling cold, but honest. A conclusion. On November 9th, I received an envelope from Malcolm's office. Inside was the fully processed, irrevocable trust, sealed, stamped final. Holding that packet gave me a feeling I hadn't had since the day I showed Diane my Navy graduation certificate. A feeling of certainty, of clarity, of something finally unchangeable. The next morning, I put on my jacket and walked slowly to the post office. I sent the trust documents to the asset management company. Standing in front of that blue mailbox, I held the envelope for a long moment. Not in hesitation, but because I wanted to remember this feeling. The feeling of doing something right for myself. I dropped it in. The soft thud at the bottom of the box sounded small, but to me it was the sound of the last knot loosening, the last cord snapping free. November came. Maple leaves covered the yard. The air smelled faintly of cold water and someone's firewood down the street. On the evening of November 12th, I stood by the window watching sunlight fall through the trees. Linda was in the yard gathering leaves. I stood in the kitchen making mint tea. There was no waiting, no aching, no need to explain myself to anyone. I had walked through the darkest Christmas of my life, through rehab, through betrayal, through weeks of silence, broken only by the old heater in my hallway. And somehow, I'd reached this quiet place. I opened the door. The hinges creaked gently. Charles Linda called, waving at me. "Look, your autumn mums finally bloomed." I stepped onto the porch. The fall breeze touched my face soft, almost like Diane brushing my cheek the way she used to. "They're beautiful," I said. "Thank you for taking care of the garden." Linda tilted her head. "I'm not taking care of it for you. I'm taking care of it for us." I looked at her. Not the way a lonely man looks for someone to fill an empty space. Not the way someone recovering seeks comfort. But the way a man looks at someone he finally recognizes as home. The afternoon light dimmed. I sat on the porch with my hot tea while Linda watered the last of the plants. Wind rustled the dry leaves. Sparrows hopped along the fence fighting over crumbs. No shouting, no demands, no keys turning in the lock. Just a peace I once thought I'd never feel again after that Christmas. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind weave through the quiet. In that moment, I understood. Some people we are born loving, and some we choose. I chose Linda. I chose calm winters. I chose a life without fear of a car pulling into my driveway. A life without wondering what my son wanted from me today. I chose myself. When I opened my eyes, the Lakewood sky was a startling blue. The evening sun warmed my face, easing something deep inside me. And I found myself speaking softly, almost as if to the people listening to this story. There are people we're born loving, and people we choose to love. Real family is the one who shows up when you fall, not the one who walks away. I set my tea down, smiling gently. A new life had begun. Quiet, steady, true. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to know they're not alone.